music in the air over my head. I hear music in the air over my head. I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Good morning. I am so grateful to be here. I'm thankful to your president, to the committee that worked so hard to get this annual program off the ground once again, and so grateful for each of you who on a Wednesday morning stepped off the treadmill and came in here to breathe with us. And this is a very necessary occasion, us reconnecting to our breath, because I want to tell you that you have been set up, and your arrival today is actually not for your clients or your future clients, that your arrival on today is for you. Amen. And we cannot lead where we have not gone. And it is very near impossible to free people while we are in bondage. And so this journey is an inner journey that will manifest in all of the things that you do, and your work will just receive an overflow from the internal transformation. I am grateful for community, and there is something very healing about community. Growing up in the Black church tradition, I like call and response. So I'm just going to ask you to turn to the person next to you and say, "I'm so glad you came today." Doesn't that feel better? It's so important because sometimes people go to yoga with their mats by themselves and they're in their zone and they leave with their mat rolled up. And some people walk into churches and sit in their pew, in their seat with their eyes stuck forward, and they leave within themselves. And so even as we journey inward, we are perpetually being reminded of the necessity of co-journers. Who I'm walking with affects my destination. And so it will benefit me to walk with those who also know how to breathe. So I want to talk today about the therapeutic role of contemplative practice, Christian mindfulness, and embodied healing. And just before we started, I was sharing with your president that my introduction to mindfulness really came from my mother, who is a contemplative. And she grew up in the projects of New York, one of 10 children in a 2-bedroom apartment. And she would go into the closet to steal away. She would go into the closet to hear from God. She would go into the closet to remind herself who she is, so that even as she was sharing shoes and sharing clothes and may or may not have lunch money, she could come out with clarity about who she is. And so it really is a contextualized experience. And there is a hunger in the earth realm for clarity, for peace, for stillness, for consciousness, for awareness. It is what people are longing for and looking for. And so for those who need chapter and verse, the word declares in Psalm 46:10, "Be still and know that I am God." And this is so important because you will have some clients and even some professors who will try to label meditation as some new age problem. They will say that that's not in the book. I don't know what book they're reading, but throughout the book, there is a call for us to meditate. And so meditation is not new age, it is ancient. And so when we connect with this ancient wisdom, then we can go forward with clarity. So our agenda on today, I want to talk first about contemplative practice in the Christian tradition, starting with the early church, the revival of contemplative practice within Christian tradition, And then I want to shift to talking about mindfulness, because what you will discover is we have new names for ancient practices. And so we will then talk about mindfulness, Christian mindfulness, cultural considerations with mindfulness, and then we will end with just a special treat of embodied healing, because many of us and many of our clients are stuck in our minds and are trapped in intellectualizing and believing that we can reach wholeness with cognition alone. And so we have come to get the body and the breath. We have come to reclaim your body and your breath. So what is contemplative practice? What is contemplative prayer? Contemplation is a gazing upon. It is turning into a spectator of sorts so that you can see it. And even as I was driving on the freeways over here, I had to remind myself not to miss the miracles I was passing along the way. If we can really take sacred pause and gaze upon what we often look over, it will take us into a deeper place of knowing, not knowing how, but knowing. And many times, especially in scholarship, we are stuck in wanting to know how. As my students would like to say, what's going to be on the test? And so when I just want to know the formula, I can miss the richness. I remember seeing an interview where Oprah was interviewing a monk, and in that Western philosophy way, she was trying to figure out the formula. So she asked him, now, how many times a day do you meditate and for how many minutes? And he chuckled and said, I'm meditating right now. This is what we talk about biblically as perpetual prayer. That as I am giving this talk, I am meditating. That as I am presenting to you, I am praying. And when you learn how to do that, to cultivate that which is already in you, you will amazingly discover you're not so anxious anymore. That you can be centered even in storms, in circumstances, in situations, because there is a well that is within you, and we are not cultivating dependence on us. We are not cultivating dependence on us, but we are facilitating people tapping in to the wealth that is already within that we have often been talked out of. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, who lied to you? Who lied to you and made you think you had no wisdom? Who lied to you and made you believe that peace was for other people but not for you? Who lied to you and told you anger would be your daily bread? And so we have been deceived and talked out of our wellness. And so as healers, as therapists, as mental health professionals, we are doing what the Swahili word is kujua, helping people remember what they already know. That is the gift. And some people have been disconnected from their inner knowing since childhood. And on tomorrow, we'll talk about trauma. And so even as clinicians, as helpers, as healers, many of us have also been talked out of our inner wellness. And so we are proving our worth by trying to take care of everyone else. Because you grew up trying to take care of people in your house. And so instead of picking partners and friends, you have picked projects. And so we are trying to get back home to ourselves. We are trying to get free from people pleasing and to know that when God looks at us, God already says today, that's good. That's good, that's good, that's good. That when God appeared to Jesus at the time of his baptism, Jesus had not done any miracles. He hadn't healed anyone. He hadn't raised the dead. And God said, this is my son in whom I am well pleased. And so it is not by our doing or our busyness, You showed up to the planet already good, already chosen, already called, already loved. And so contemplative prayer is a gift from God, but it requires an important participation. We have to consent to the presence of God. How do I withdraw my consent? It is when I say prayers that are wish lists for my sugar daddy. That is not consenting to the presence of God. It's God bless me, bless my children, send my rent money, help my head to feel better, let me pass my classes, let the faculty recognize that I really am good and I belong here. We can live a life of wish lists and believe we have lived a life of prayer. And that is how we miss it. And so to consent is to know that in this conversation, there have to be times when I am silent. I have not prayed if I have never been silent. I have only talked at God. And sometimes we say like, oh, other people hear from God all the time. I wish I could do that. Turn off the TV, turn off your phone, get still, get still. And often the message is one you already know, but we're waiting for something new and fresh, but we haven't done what was placed in us to do 10 years ago. And so it is an opening to God. It is a resting in God. It is the recognition that busyness is not the same thing as wholeness. That busyness is not the same thing as healed. And I want you to know you can trick a lot of people. You know, people can look at my vita, at my resume, and say, when do you rest? Good question. Good question. When do you rest? When do you rest? And so being able to surrender to, and that surrender word is very hard for those of us with control issues. We don't like that. We don't like that. But this letting go instead of frantically grabbing at things and being still. So it is not only a connecting with God, but it's an important awareness that worship is experiencing God, and I cannot encounter God and be unchanged. It is impossible. So if I say I have worshiped, and then at the end of worship service, I'm rolling my eyes and fussing at everybody in church, did I worship? I might have raised my hands. I might have sung some songs. But if you encounter God, there will be a transformation. There will be show some sign, some fruit, right? So that's why in therapy, it's not just a matter of people parroting back to us what they think we want to hear, right? In the living of their lives, there will be some fruit. If there is transformation, there will be some fruit. And so that is the part where we start also looking at behavior and shifting that takes place when authentic change has happened. Another part of contemplative prayer is stillness and silence and a ceasing of activity. So that can be a part of people's fasting practice, and people fast from different things. Some people fast from food. Some people fast from social media. Some people fast from the phone. Some people fast from alcohol. So it is a turning away and a turning to. And many of us miss it because we turn away and deny ourselves, but don't turn to. So now you're just hungry. Talking about, I'm fasting, it didn't work. Well, all you did was stop eating, but you did not feed your mind, your heart, your spirit. You did not nourish yourself. So yes, you're just hungry. So we have to think about this journey and process of moving away from and moving toward. I am excited to share with you that the contemplative practice in the Christian tradition actually emerged in Africa. And so it's important on this Black History Month to counter the myth that Christ was not in Africa until slavery. So I encourage you to read about the early church in Africa before it came here. Yes? So interestingly, Jesus starts us on this tradition as a baby. How is that so? When he was a baby and in confusion and chaos and people were wanting to destroy him, God sent he and his family where? To where? To Egypt. And so he had to withdraw from the chaos, confusion, violence, and go into Egypt, to go into safety. So it really is about, in the early church, you have to recognize that Christianity did not start off in power, that Christians started as marginalized people. And can I tell you, you worship differently when you're marginalized and oppressed. It shows up differently when you're not operating straight out of a place of privilege. I'm going to give a parenthetical story that I found really interesting. I was talking with a young woman who accepted her call into ministry. She's Chinese American, and she came and was a part of our African Methodist Episcopal Church. And she said, Dr. Thema, I noticed something different when I go to white churches and when I go to black churches. And I said, what did you notice? So she said, well, at white churches, it feels like people come in with a sense of confidence, entitlement, and the aim of the worship service is to humble them. And so the songs and the sermon are all designed so that by the end, they're saying this. She said, in the black church, people come in tired. People come in with frustration and disappointment. And it seems as if the entire service is designed to empower them, so that the service is successful if by the end they're like this. Where you start affects where you need to go. God meets us where we are, and that affects the relationship and the unfolding. And so that is why we talk about it being personal, because it really is about, what did you come with? How did you show up? And how you showed up speaks to the transformation that needs to take place. So in the early tradition, Christians were hiding, they were silent, they were secretive, and so they would meet in houses. They would go out in the desert. We talk about the desert mothers and fathers. They would go and be still and silent with God, and then when they returned, people would seek them out because the ones who went the furthest had the most wisdom. So it was like a rough thing. The more you would go run from people, the more people would chase you. They're out in the desert, they're up in a tree, and here come a group of people. You have the answer. We've been looking for you. And isn't it something when we stop trying to promote ourselves? When we don't need people to call our name? When we get very still in ourselves, you become a magnet. You become a magnet. So it's funny for me. I've done a number of television events, and people say, who's your agent? I don't have an agent. I said, how did you get all that? So sometimes we are hustling, trying to be seen, trying to be known, and the best thing that you might need to do is so in the margins, it's also interesting to know that in the house churches in the desert, women and men ministered. So you want to read about not only the desert fathers, but the desert mothers who would go into their secret closets and pray. So contemplative practice has re-emerged It never went away, but people are more hungry for it now. And we consider, why would that be? It's because people are anxious and frustrated, and there has been an exodus from the church. Because people want authenticity and they want access. So if people are a part of a tradition all their lives and feel they have not been discipled, they have not learned anything, then it's, why do I need to keep going there, or I'm going out of habit? And so there has been an inner turning, an inner awakening with people wanting to experience God here. And so the Spirit of God says, come unto me, all ye that are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Come unto me, all ye that are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. I love you more than you love yourself. I know you more than you know yourself. You can run, but you can't hide. You can run, but you can't hide. I won't give up on you. I am your very breath. And so in mindfulness, they say focus on your breath. In Christianity, we say focus on God. I said in mindfulness, they say forget about everything else. Center on your breath. When other thoughts come, let them come and go back to the breath. And so it is not new, it is very old. There is one practice, contemplative practice, called the prayer of simple regard. And all you need to know about the prayer of simple regard is it is taking moments to notice God noticing you. Right? When you're driving on the freeway. I was sharing with someone when you're like, oh, I only have 40 minutes left. That's a good moment for simple regard. God, do you see me on this freeway? When you're about to take an exam and you open it and nothing that they said was going to be on the exam is on the exam. God, are you seeing this? When it's Valentine's Day and you're all by yourself. God, are you seeing this? And so we begin to notice God noticing us, and it is a reminder for us that we are not in it by ourselves, that we are not forgotten nor forsaken, but Jehovah Shammah is God is present. God is here. And that is what we are aiming to do, is to be in the present. With centering prayer, we can focus on one word or one image. Sometimes the word peace, sometimes the image of a dove, and we just focus. Some people focus on the cross. For me, I like the empty tomb, right? Empty tomb, because there was trauma here, but I'm coming out of there, right? Yeah. There is something about knowing that the trauma didn't have the final say. And so in contemplative prayer, it is a response to the call of God. We are all having a pulling at us, but we can deny it with our busyness, or we can turn stuff off and we can get still even in the discomfort. And we consent. Loving God, we take sacred pause. We pause to rest in you, quiet our minds that they may be still, fill our hearts that they may abide in love. Christ above us, Christ beneath us, Christ around us, Christ before us, Christ behind us, Christ within us. Open our hearts to the presence of your Spirit. Now, you want to be mindful with trauma clients. They might not be ready for Christ to be all of those places. So you ask people, where would you like Christ to show up for you today? Do I want Christ to sit next to me on the couch? Christ beside me, right? Do I want to feel protected? Christ above me. And so we tune in to the realities of where people are. Now, one of the things I have noticed is at psychology conferences, people can be very rigid and tight. The first time I sang at APA before my talk, someone said, I didn't know you could sing at APA. I said, I didn't see a memo that said I couldn't. So, but how it is, psychology is the study of the soul. So how it is that we are supposed to be soul people, healing people, and we are stuck with these PowerPoints and no windows and our pantsuits on, looking unhealed. And then when I got my Master's of Divinity and I went to my first religion conference, PowerPoint, suits on, no windows, no singing, no movement, no breath, no spirit, just scholarship without spirit. And so it would not work for me to draw you here talking about contemplative practice and mindfulness and for me to talk nonstop. And so get your word in your mind or your image in your mind. I invite you to uncross your legs. I invite you to uncross your arms. If you are comfortable, you can close your eyes. If you are vigilant, you can keep your eyes gazing downward. And whatever your image or word is, you keep seeing it or keep repeating it in your spirit. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. You can bring your focus back to the room. Let me hear what some of your words were. Call it out. Grace, attitude, hope, gratitude. Say it again. Peace, trust, life, dance. What were some of your images? Ocean, anchor, tree, mountains, bird. Yes, flying free.
Little girl dancing with my father.
Ah, beautiful. Yes, dancing at the beach. And who wants to be a brave soul, a courageous, truthful soul, and say they didn't do it? That's it. I feel you. I'm here with you. Let me tell you why we connect. In my psychology graduate program, our professor was teaching about hypnotherapy, and he hypnotized the class, and I refused to go under. I said, look, I'm a trauma survivor and a Black woman. I don't know what you're about to do in here. So y'all could float away if you want to. I'm going to be right here keeping watch. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you. Said I'll meditate by myself. So, all right, mindfulness. And I know some of you came particularly for contemplative and some came particularly for mindfulness, but I'm hoping that you're getting it is all interrelated. Yes. So with mindfulness, it is being present to the present moment on purpose, with self-compassion and without judgment. It is an awareness of my feelings, my thoughts, my bodily sensations. Sometimes when you talk to your clients and you ask them how they're feeling and they give you something they're thinking, it is because they are disconnected and don't know what they feel. Or they may have grown up in households where certain emotions were not acceptable, or in some church traditions where it is not acceptable. I often talk about in my church tradition and in my cultural tradition, people will say to children, fix your face. right? Even if you're sad, nobody wants to know it. If you're mad, we don't want to see it. Fix your face. Isn't it something that we make that demand but not heal your heart? Right? And so we teach children early to mask. We teach them early to say, how are you? Fine. How are you? Blessed. And then when they are self-destructing, we say, they didn't tell me. Have we created spaces for people to even know and speak what they feel, what they need, what they think? So mindfulness is a way of thinking and understanding, and it is also about our practice. And there are different forms of mindfulness. And so the foundations, when we talk about mindfulness in that term, John Kabat-Zinn, we are often talking about Buddhist mindfulness. And it's important to acknowledge that because sometimes people have not acknowledged that to Christian clients. And then when they Google it, they feel disrespected and that you were trying to trick them, right? So it is especially important with your Christian clients to say to them that mindfulness as it is described and written about, that many of the writers come from a Buddhist tradition, but there is also Christian mindfulness, there is secular mindfulness, there's Christian contemplative practice. Information is important instead of being dismissive because people are guarding their spirits. And so that is the reason why some are not open to mindfulness. So there are different practices with seated meditation. We are centering on the breath. And what will always happen is some other thoughts will come. But the famous saying with mindfulness is, you cannot stop a bird from flying over your head, but you can stop it from building a nest in your head, right? What does that mean? That while some of you were focusing on your word, you might have started thinking about what you want to have for lunch today, right? So then you can think that and then go back to, oh yeah, peace. Your peace, right? The bird flew, but it's not going to land. But if you started thinking about, now, if I had that pesto, and a Lipton iced tea, that would, right? Now I have let it land, yes? And so it is intentionally shifting back to the breath. There's also mindful walking, and many of us are in a hurry to go somewhere, and we are going nowhere. And so us really slowing down and becoming tuned into the body as we're walking. A big piece that people have started writing about and talking about is mindful eating. Many of us are shoveling food. Many of us are eat all of our meals out of drive-thrus, sitting in our car. Many of us, especially students, are living out of vending machines, right? And so it becomes this mindless eating is like binge eating, right? It's not a sense of enjoying the taste. It's not even a sense of being able to enjoy this bite. It's I just got to get it all in, right? And so with mindful eating, we slow down and are present with our eating. Mindful movement is also with dance. Some people will call it improvisation or being led by the Spirit or being open and present in your body. And one that often we don't prepare students to think about in psychology programs in general, and especially in faith-based psychology programs, is mindful intimacy. I see, got quiet. Oh, y'all got quiet. If we do not prepare students to talk about sexuality, then they will not talk about it with their clients, and our clients are really struggling with all different layers of that, of not being present, right? So some people cannot be intimate without a substance. Some people cannot be intimate with their spouse without looking at porn first because they are disconnected from themselves. And then we're walking in as clinicians who are disconnected and uncomfortable. And people pick up on our discomfort and say, oh, they just want me to say a Bible verse. And so mindful intimacy, that vulnerability of being present with ourselves and with another. We could do a whole workshop on that. So there are many benefits to mindfulness. It has been shown to improve the immune system, to decrease our heart risk, combating insomnia. And this is an important one when we talk about progressive muscle relaxation, that even when you have clients who cannot sleep, to encourage them to lay down. If your mind is racing, at least let your body rest, right? At least let your body rest. It also eases depression and has been very helpful with PTSD. It's wonderful if you've never seen it to see the mindfulness videos with veterans, right? Because we can make assumptions about who would be open to it or who will be present. And it is such a gift, especially for those who have had to be vigilant for so much of their lives. It is effective with pain management, decreasing anxiety and distress, blood pressure, cholesterol, and positive psychology, increasing compassion and empathy, right? And so the gift of stillness and silence and connection and awareness, as opposed to just constant handouts and behavioral interventions, but also the intervention of solitude, the intervention of presence. So there are attitudes of mindfulness that we think about. And again, you want to read the work of Jon Kabat-Zinn. And the first one they talk about is non-judgment. So non-judgment is very important. I'm saying for your clients, but really for you. I'm secretly talking to you, okay? But you could take notes like it's for all your clients. That's fine. So here's the thing. If I am depressed and then I judge myself harshly for being depressed, I have doubled my problems, right? And this is especially takes place in the Christian tradition where people will use this kind of language. I'm not claiming it. I'm not going to claim that. Well, you're depressed though. So whether you say it or not, you're depressed. Yes? So we have to give people permission to tell themselves the truth, right? And so when we are jealous, when we are envious, when we're angry, that's a big one with clients. You know, if I'll comment on, oh, well, you seem really angry. I'm not mad. What would you call that? What would you call what you're feeling right now? I don't know, but I'm not mad. Okay. And so to not judge ourselves, let's do another call and response. Just turn and tell your neighbor, tell yourself the truth. Tell yourself the truth. Yeah, I mean, it's bad enough to lie to people. It's a terrible thing to lie to yourself, right? And here's another big one that we'll get. I'm over it. Girl, I'm so over it. I don't think you're over it. I'm over it. And so I can tell myself the truth that I want to be over it, but I'm not over it. I want to be done, but I'm not done. Yes? And so not only do we have non-judgment, we have patience, beginner's mind. This is the part about I don't have to be an expert, that I'm willing to be open to new experiences and things I have never done before. That is the openness. Being able to trusting ourselves and others. Non-striving, which goes against our whole thing right now, really a capitalistic mindset of hustle and lean in and motivate and grind. That's the big one. You got to grind, wake up and grind, rise and grind. It's like, it's a lot of this, right? But instead, non-striving, that I'm already enough. Acceptance, and some people in the realm of social justice have gotten upset with these mindfulness grants where they'll get these $1 million grants and go into the inner city and teach marginalized children to be sedate. And so some people see that and say like, no, we need y'all to rise up, right? We're trying to raise warriors and y'all trying to put them to sleep. So what we have to understand is acceptance doesn't mean I am okay with the way things are. It is an acknowledgement, right? So I acknowledge that this is, and now I can figure out what I want to do about it. But first I have to acknowledge what is. So it is possible to have a consciousness of social justice and have a consciousness of acceptance, right? It is what it is, even though I do not want it to remain that way, but it is what it is, yes? Acceptance and then letting go, not clinging so much. And this is a lesson in and of itself because sometimes we're holding on to things that are already gone. So there are some challenges when we look at our Christian tradition and these attitudes. One is the non-judging, because some churchy people We'll say, well, God, there is judgment. There is judgment and there's right and wrong. And we can't be in the middle. We can't be lukewarm. God will spit us out of his mouth. So what we really want to do with that is to first give ourselves permission for truth, right? Because if my judgment is based in creating a culture where people have to lie, then I have not really brought about healing, transformation, or restoration. I just have a sanctuary full of silent people. When I was doing my work around HIV, and the pastors would all say, well, we could go do that in the community. We don't have that issue in here. Okay. All right. So the judgment, patience, we recognize and celebrate. Beginner's mind. Who can think of the scripture for beginner's mind? Unless you enter as a child. That's it. To come into the kingdom as a child. That is beginner's mind. Trusting, and we would include the theist perspective of, I'm not just trusting myself or trusting others, but trusting God, right? So that is the addition. Trusting God, trusting myself, trusting others. Non-striving, this is an interesting one because we have the verse on, I press toward the mark, right? And faith without works is dead. But we also recognize grace over works. Grace over works, right? That, we don't, as someone said to me recently, we don't actually have a petty God, right? If your God is petty, maybe you need to go talk to God some more, right? So, but we can have this piece of there are works and there is fruit, but also in my stillness, God is still saying, I am beloved. Yes? Acceptance is also a part of our faith tradition, to acknowledge, and even in our circumstances and situations, and the letting go, right? Forgetting those things that are behind. And so some things we need to let go of. If you're going to do mindfulness with Christian clients, you may need to adjust some of your language, right? So for example, a lot of times in mindfulness, we will talk about emptying ourselves. And I've had Christian clients respond to that statement with, so they could put what in me, right? I'm not going to just be emptying myself, all right? So instead, if I say, open yourself to the Holy Spirit, right? No pushback. So you have to know your client, know your audience to understand what language is going to be congruent with them. Not only the language about emptying or openness, but also the presence of God, right? That God is in it with us, and also we still want people not to erase themselves, right? So what it means for me to be a presence and God present with me, right? So it's not that I have to disappear. We like to say, hide me behind the cross, right? So I don't have to deny a self exists in order to commune with God. So I want to say quickly, as I'm watching my time, a few cultural considerations. One very important is cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation is, in the name of one Black spoken word artist, they love everything about you but you. They love your hips. They love your lips. They love everything about you but you. So if you take an Asian cultural tradition and do not have any respect for, any acknowledgement for, any care for Asian people, that is appropriation. That we are trying to take something and separate it from a foundation and from a root. Not only can there be appropriation and erasure around ethnic and racial culture, but also the spiritual dimensions of it, right? So, people who practice mindfulness will say secular mindfulness misses something, right? It is a psychological intervention devoid of spirit. So it can help you reach some treatment goals, but know that you're not getting the whole package, right? And so what it means to acknowledge our faith within our meditation is a critical piece. Soulfulness is also a part of mindfulness that was created by a scholar at Pepperdine with me, Dr. Shelley Harrell, who comes out of an African American tradition, and she deals with soulfulness as a life force and an energy. Because sometimes you go into these mindfulness retreats and workshops, and it feels like everyone is like this. Like that is the goal. I feel nothing. I talk very quietly for an hour, and this means I'm really mindful because I'm just... So like that's not my culture. Yeah. Right? I can't do that very long. So it is about soulfulness is connecting with the life force in me, and the life force in me is alive. So I don't have to be dead to be mindful. Yes? So connecting with our senses and our spirituality. The last thing I'll just say about the cultural piece is for marginalized communities, whether we're talking about women, whether we're talking about people who are undocumented, whether we're talking about ethnic minorities, whether we're talking about people who are impoverished, whether we're talking about LGBTQ, that many of those communities are perpetually taught that they have to prove themselves, right? That our worth is in our busyness. And so with that in mind, it is a revolutionary act for a woman to be still, right? You're supposed to be doing 5 things, right? Supposed to be, right? I'm doing my son's liver science project. We making the food and talking to somebody on the phone. I'm doing and watching the news because I need to know what's going on, doing it all. And so it is a radical act for a Black person, for a brown person, for an Asian person in America to be still. That I have nothing to prove. I am enough. I am enough. Yes. And so, 8 minutes on embodied healing. As we are thinking about mindful movement, I want to recommend the text, The Body Keeps the Score, by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. And it is a trauma text and recognizing how we store trauma in our bodies. So if my body has been the site of my trauma, I cannot leave the body out of my healing. And even if you did not experience a physical or sexual trauma, any trauma or stress shows up in the body, right? And that's holding our breath, grinding our teeth at night, with backache, and they can't find out what's wrong, with nausea, with migraines. It's in the body. The body is telling the story. And even when we say we're fine, if you lay on that massage table, that massage therapist is going to tell you the truth about how fine you are, okay? Because all these knots up in here, right, don't look so fine. But we can trick people with our church smile, right? All is well. Doesn't that sound good? All is well, right? But the body is saying something else. And so psychology often leaves out the body, and we focus on cognition. And in our Christian faith and in other religions, people often leave out the body. And actually in our faith, we often demonize the body, right? The flesh. Ooh, the flesh is bad. Fight the flesh. Fight the flesh. Do you understand that God made this? Like that God designed it? Ooh, I told you it's another workshop, how God designed this thing. So for us to give people permission to be present in the body. And so what I want to do for our closing actually is to invite some people to move with me. And so if you are a dancer, if you used to dance, if in your dreams you are a dancer, I want to invite you to come up. We're going to play a song, and you're going to move with me, some very simple movements. You won't have to, yeah. So I'm just trusting. Come on down. I'm trusting. Yes, thank you. Got one. Who else is coming?
I'll move with my upper body.
Okay, all right. I got 2. I'll wait. I'm that kind of therapist. I'll wait. There are more dancers in here. Come on. You know you took ballet when you were 7. Come on. Took a modern class when you were 12. Yes. Yeah, I really do church. Is there one? Is there one? Come on, yeah, I knew I was waiting for some. Yes, yes. Hallelujah. Yeah, oh, yes, yes, yes. So the song that we're going, wonderful, yay! Can I tell you all this? When God gave me this, it was one of those moments of me noticing God noticing me. I'm like, God, are they going to leave me hanging? And God said, no, no, no. You just do it. I got some dancers planted in the midst, okay? So that's what the meditation is. That's what contemplative practice is I turn stuff off and I sit or I walk and I consent to the presence of God, and then God does God's part. Introducing the Fuller Theological Seminary praise dancers.